Hey friendly people, my friend sent me this video called "This is what hookup culture is doing to you, the truth." And he said that this YouTuber had a very nuanced take, which I always appreciate. So I thought I'd watch the video now with you all and share my thoughts as a dating coach.
In my early 20s, I used to go out to clubs and go out with my friends and drink and have a good time. And in that stage, I casually hooked up. I wouldn't say I was someone who did a lot of one-night stands or someone that was heavily in the hookup scene, but I definitely rode the hookup culture wave. It was really normal to be a side chick or have a side bae or like a weekend bae where you would meet up and have a Netflix and chill cuddle, or if you're going out, you know that's gonna be your person that you're gonna go home with. And in my 20s, I was really stuck in a cycle of entertaining and talking to men who gave me the bare minimum. I would light up so heavily when he sent me a text, or he replied back to my Snapchat story, or when he liked my photo, the photo that I only posted so that I could get his attention.
So this is something that's so common in our 20s, where we just base so much of our personal worth on how the world judges us and how the world sees us. And it makes sense because you go through school, and especially like middle school and high school, where you're just kind of programmed to think that way, right? If you're not one of the cool kids, you might have gotten bullied, you might have gotten ignored, maybe you didn't get the romantic partners that you wanted. So it feels like what matters most is making sure that other people like you. And when you're young, you don't really see why that's a big deal. It's like, cool, I'm getting some free attention or I'm getting some Instagram likes, but slowly and subconsciously, you are lowering your self-worth and basing how you feel about yourself on what random people think.
And unfortunately, a part of trying to get a guy to commit or trying to see where things go, I indulged in hookup culture. I would hook up with guys way too soon. I would hook up with guys who still were not being clear with what they even wanted with me. And it got to a point where I was so depressed and so unhappy because hookup culture was also just so normal and all my friends were doing it, like everyone is doing it. It was really hard for me to be able to self-reflect and look back and be like, okay, hooking up with this guy who didn't want to even commit to me and didn't care about me didn't actually make me feel good. Now, of course, I was taught as a young girl to not just give your body up to men who don't care about you or sleep around. The type of guys that I was hooking up with, they weren't one-night stands. I built some form of connection with them, but I was falling in love with the things that they were saying to me, but not their actions. And again, because hookup culture was just so prevalent in that time and still is now, I got desensitized to the repercussions that hookup culture created.
And again, especially when we're young, we're just so beholden to what our peer groups think. And even as we get older as adults, we still are affected by things like mob mentality, where if everyone's doing the same thing, then it's hard not to just jump in and see things clearly for yourself. And often in those scenarios, we will disregard our own values, our own boundaries. We will justify the things we're doing or the things that are being done to us, because if everyone else is doing it and it seems normal, then it absolutely should be in our minds. So our judgment gets clouded and we often act in ways that we normally never would otherwise.
I started to realize that hookup culture was really toxic for me and not helpful when I would wake up the next day from a guy, let's say that I went over a Netflix and chilled or went out to the club and he was my weekend bae that I would always like go home with. When I woke up in the morning and I didn't get a certain text from him or the amount of attention that I really wanted for that next progression, it started to make me realize that indulging in hookup culture isn't getting me anywhere. Hooking up with him didn't help me get anything. I didn't actually gain anything from it. Hookup culture teaches you in society that it's for your liberation as well as a woman. You're gonna feel so much better about yourself. You should have the ability to sleep with whoever you want or hook up with whoever you want. And although that is true, I think that there's a lot of downfalls to participating in hookup culture that a lot of us women are not being aware of, or the conversations are not being had. Some women in society, they normalize hookup culture to their friends. Of course, men do the same thing. And it's time for us to be very, very real with the fact that hookup culture does affect us. And I want to talk about some of the ways that hookup culture is toxic specifically to women.
And I agree with what she's saying, that there's inherently nothing wrong with hookup culture. Like if somebody has a clear head and wants to date around and hook up, I think that can be completely healthy. The problem is when we have mismanaged expectations and we're seeking something more than a random hookup hookup will generally ever offer. If you're expecting to have some fun and to get your rocks off, you can have a good time. If you're expecting to feel loved or appreciated on a real level, you should probably look elsewhere.
I want to preface this with saying there is always going to be exceptions to the rules. There were some girls who commented on my hookup culture TikTok being like, hooking up can be fun, you can learn a lot, you can get a lot of experience, this, that, and the third. And what I'm gonna say is, most likely this video is not gonna be for you if you are a woman who truly knows that hookup culture does not affect you. Although, I will say I've seen it in so many of my friends, and I've seen it in myself before. When I was younger, I would tell myself that hookup culture was not affecting me and that it was normal and I wanted to be doing these things. But deep down, when I got to the root of it, I was lying to myself. But if you are somebody who thinks that you are the minority, just remember that you are the minority. If you feel liberated, if you feel like you're having the best time of your life and you're happy with indulging in hookup culture and it's not affecting you, then you can watch this video if you want, but just know that I am aware that there are certain women who can handle this type of lifestyle, but I do think it's way less than we like to tell ourselves or admit to.
Let me go on record and say that I'm not opposed to people hooking up if that's really what they feel is right for them. I know lots of people that dated around and hooked up and are okay with it, and even still to this day are happy doing it. The struggle is that when we're young, we don't often have the emotional maturity or resilience to deal with those feelings in a healthy way, and we don't really understand the full scope of the potential consequences and risks that come from constantly hooking up.
I truly think that giving up your body to a man who is not going to commit to you just to try to see where things go is adding to another layer of pain that you are going to feel when this man inevitably does not commit to you. And I think a lot of us women, sometimes we give up too much too soon, thinking that it's going to help us connect. And on one hand, I am not somebody who fully advocates for waiting till marriage and being celibate for the rest of your life. I think it's important to realize just how much you might be giving yourself up to a situationship where you're just seeing where things go.
And this goes back to having mismanaged expectations, where a lot of men, for one reason or another, not always sinister, won't give you anything more substantial than just a casual hookup. They're not going to give you real emotional investment. They're not going to give you compassion. They're not going to give you some sense of deep understanding, because often they're young themselves and they don't know how to provide those things. So even though you might be just going into this looking for a hookup initially, once we're intimate with people, we tend to often get a little bit of emotional connection. And when you realize that that person doesn't feel that same way, or they can't really offer you anything substantial, or worse, they're just using you to pleasure themselves, it can feel really, really shitty.
A lot of us women, we learn how to engage in physical connection and intimacy with a man from either, not gonna say the word out loud, or from the guys that we hook up with. And now I'm not gonna say that's completely wrong or bad to learn from either source, but it is important for you to realize that when you are hooking up with a man, he has his own likes and dislikes, his own desires, also his own history, his own wounds. So this man might be teaching you something in the bedroom, something that he likes, but that is completely not aligned with what you even want, what you desire, and so forth. And a lot of us women, instead of realizing, oh, this is something that I do not like, he's showing me something that I don't like to do, I don't want to do this again when I hook up with him, sometimes we tend to just forget about what we actually want, or we don't have the voice and we don't say no to things. And then we start to learn how to be that girl, be that woman, or that guy, even though that's not even who we really are. Or maybe when you're casually hooking up with people, you might say something that will create a brand new insecurity for yourself. And again, I'm not saying that your own boyfriend couldn't create a same insecurity, but if you're picking up certain insecurities or you're morphing into becoming a certain girl for a man who is not going to commit to you, who doesn't care about you, and who really only cares about himself, and now you are walking around with certain wounds and insecurities from someone who is no longer even in your life.
And this is a bit heartbreaking because I've heard this from a lot of women. They really didn't understand their own bodies or needs when they were younger, but they saw some corn, as she calls it, and they want to make sure that a random guy likes them and again chase that kind of validation. So they will do whatever possible possible to make sure that that guy feels pleased, and often at the expense of their own pleasure or values. And I've talked to a lot of women later that feel a deep sense of regret or even trauma from these experiences because they pushed themselves to do things that they didn't actually want to and really cross their own boundaries. Hell, in sometimes even really bad cases, they were manipulated or coerced or even pressured into doing those things.
Another reason why I think hookup culture can be very toxic to women is that it actually disconnects us from our own bodies. I think there's this lie that us women will tell ourselves this, or hookup culture in general will say, oh, you gain so much experience by hooking up with different people, and same thing with like dating, right? You date a lot of people, you get to know what you like and you don't like and this, that. But I think that there's definitely a fine line, and when it comes to getting intimate with someone, especially someone who is in the category of just being casual, because he is not committed to building a deeper romance, intimate connection with you, you might be hooking up with someone who just wants to have a good, fun time. And I do think a lot of men who are in that space, they don't really care to know your likes and your dislikes or what feels good to you and what doesn't. And sometimes in the moment, we just kind of want to present our best selves and have the most fun. But when we take our attention off of what actually feels good to us and being able to even communicate that with a man, we disconnect from our bodies. A lot of the reasons why a lot of us women don't even enjoy getting intimate with a man is because we don't even know what feels good to our own bodies, because we haven't been able to voice that. We don't even know what feels good because nobody's explored that with us.
See, I do think there is value in dating around a little bit to understand, like she said, the values in somebody you like, what you don't like, how you communicate, and grow as a person and as a potential partner. But when you're young and chasing the validation from endless people, then inevitably you will often sacrifice your own understanding of yourself to just make sure that you are appeasing that other person or those other people. And normally in life, that's not that bad when it's like trying to figure out what TV shows you like or what kind of food you're interested in. That's fine. But when it comes to the most vulnerable human experiences of being intimate, and especially as a woman where it's very vulnerable, that has a very fine line of potentially leaving some real deep scars or wounds on a human.
We've kind of put our wants and our desires to the side just to connect with this person in real time. And because this person is not trying to commit to us or is taking what he's learned from everything else in his life and applying it to you, thinking that it's gonna work, it might not work. Another reason why I think hookup culture is toxic to women, and I might trigger some people here, but it's that you are a woman and you do get emotionally attached to men. And I personally believe that we tend to emotionally attach a lot more than men will. I'm not going to make a blanket statement here and say that no men ever attach to a woman. And I'm also not going to say that there are not that minority of women who can hook up with a man and have no emotional attachment. But if you're watching this video and you are like me, there's definitely some emotional attachment there. And a good question to ask yourself to know if you're emotionally attached to a man who you say you're just casually hooking up with is if he leaves you unread, if he goes and talks to another girl at the club that night when you're really wanting him to talk to you, or if you stay the night and the next morning he's not wanting to bring you out for breakfast and he's kind of like waiting for you to go ASAP, then most likely your emotions are involved. Most likely you have some attachment to the outcome of being with this guy. That can be very detrimental when you have given up your body to this man.
That's a really interesting line of questioning because I generally agree. I think that more often than not, compared to men, women get a bit more emotionally involved when they're intimate with somebody. I 100% also agree that's a blanket statement and there's plenty of guys who feel the same way, but there's just something more vulnerable about allowing somebody who's generally much bigger than you, much stronger than you, enter your body. You're in a much more passive, fragile state in that sense. And so I think we often tell ourselves, yeah, we're not catching feelings at all. But if that person doesn't respond or doesn't invest in you or sees other people and you feel really hurt by that, then I think you're not being fully honest with yourself that you probably do have some emotional involvement.
I hear this from men all the time. A lot of them can emotionally completely detach when it comes to hooking up with girls. A lot of the time, just how men operate, this is not to give them excuses, and we can go into a whole nother video about that. But I think a lot of us, sometimes we think when a man has treated us bad, or we see the guy that we really like going out and hooking out with somebody else, we tell ourselves, okay, you know what, I'm just gonna act like him and I'm gonna do the same thing. But it's important to acknowledge that you might be different than him. He might be able to go physically hook up with someone, but emotionally completely detach and not care about this person. But can you do the same thing? And again, ask yourself those questions. If you try and do the same thing, but the next day you are upset when you don't get a text back from the guy that you hooked up with last night, then you are different. You have your emotions involved, and that's okay. But it means you might have to go about things a lot differently.
And there's one point here that she didn't explore, which is often when I talk to women who are saying, you know what, I cannot get emotionally involved. I'm just going to act like, these guys, and I'm going to be completely detached and distant. They actually start putting up walls and creating more insecurities by being invulnerable with humans for then and in the future. This is where people carry a lot of emotional baggage, and they're like, as long as I don't ever let anybody get close, they can't hurt me. But at the same time, if you never let anybody get close, then you never have any meaningful connections in your life. And that's why I think a lot of people who are like, I don't catch feelings, I don't care, and they kind of put up these arbitrary barriers, often feel really mistrusting of, the other sex, or feel really alone, or just continually carry around that hurt and pain because they're never learning how to process it or deal with it in a healthy way. And when you're protecting yourself and you're afraid that everyone's going to hurt you, or maybe you already have been hurt, then often we start to reciprocate those own behaviors. And that's a big part of what creates the cycle of toxic dating behaviors that we all see nowadays.
These are some things that I started to do once I realized that hookup culture wasn't really helping me and it wasn't making me feel good about myself. I wasn't getting any more intimate with knowing my own body and just loving on myself. So when we find ourselves in hookup culture, usually we're not really clear on what we're wanting. We just kind of fall into the cycle of casually hooking up with people. So get clear on what you're looking for right now in your life. Are you in your single era? Are you in a time of your life where you truly know and you're like that minority of women who can participate in hookup culture, you know your body, you really enjoy it, and you're having a good time? Then amazing. Are you someone who is looking for a relationship? You know that you want a boyfriend that's gonna maybe lead to a husband, and you want that commitment. Once you become clear on who you are right now and what you are looking for, it will definitely help you be able to weed out some of the guys that are going to pull you into that hookup culture, the guys who are expecting you to hook up and casually have fun with you.
I love that advice, and I often tell people that they should really understand what they want out of these situations, what they want for themselves, and what they want for their lives. Because then you can go out and experiment and explore, but at least have some kind of correct direction and then adjust accordingly. For example, if you know as a woman that you eventually want a guy that you can be serious with, then you can still date around casually, but you don't always need to hook up so quickly, because that also is a nice screening tool. If you're with a guy and he's pushing for sex right away, and you put up boundaries that you want to get to know him a little bit better, then often those guys who are only looking for a hookup will show you their cards. They'll get frustrated, they'll try to pressure you, and they'll show you that they're putting their wants over your boundaries. If you don't know what you want, it's too easy to get walked over and be left with regrets.
Another thing that's really important is if you're currently talking to a guy right now and you've casually been hooking up, or you know that it might come, it's always good to get really clear with the man that you're talking to. I used to get into situationships all of the time, and a lot of it was because there was no communication. If I communicated with a guy from the beginning that I was looking for a relationship, I was looking for something serious, I wasn't looking to just casually hook up, I would have weeded out a lot of guys. Now, I'm not saying that some guys are not gonna tell you what you wanna hear and then lure you in. But once I started getting better at being clear with the man and actually communicating that, whether he would like it or not, whether he would stay talking to me or not, really helped me not fall into hookup culture. There were guys in my life who were actually really respectable, and they were like, honestly, thank you for letting me know that you're looking for something serious and that you don't just want to hook up, but right now, like, I'm in a period of my life where I just want to casually hook up and just see where things go, this, that. And once we got clear on things, sometimes I would still stay in it because I still needed to go deeper and do some more deeper work within myself. But as I got older and started healing parts of me. Once I had communication with these guys and a guy would tell me he is not looking for a relationship, I saved myself the energy and my body from being wasted. I know that sounds like a bad term, but that's kind of true.
I love that she was honest that while she tried to communicate, she still often made mistakes. But that ongoing communication and self-understanding eventually helped her figure out who she was and to kind of invest in the right connections. And that's the point. You communicating your expectations, it's not going to guarantee, like she said, that some guys aren't going to lead you on, or some guys aren't going to just pretend like they're not looking for sex and then once they get it, they walk away. But at least you're doing two things. One, you are mitigating some of those circumstances. And two, you are getting better at communicating with confidence and understanding yourself to figure out what's best for you in the long term.
Another thing that I think is so important for us women to understand is that every new person that you get intimate with, you're going to have to learn their body. They're gonna have to learn yours. Everything is always going to be really new. So don't believe the lie that hookup culture sells you about how you get so much experience by hooking up with different people and seeing what you like and you dislike. A little bit of that could be true, but I think what is more important, especially for us women, is that we start to discover what feels good to our bodies, which we can do ourselves. So that is having a self-pleasure practice. That is also just putting ourselves first instead of learning what he likes and what he wants from me. What do you want? What feels good to you? What would you like him to do for you? Those are things that sometimes we can't communicate with even a man that we're even in a relationship with because we don't have that connection to ourselves.
I love the advice of having a self-pleasure practice because it's amazing how many young people just immediately jump into trying to please other people and really not knowing themselves, or they watch porn and they have completely wrong ideas of how to get off and how to feel good. I do think it can be valuable to date around and again casually hook up because then you do get a little bit of an understanding of how you interact with other people, different sexual experiences, other people can teach you things and vice versa, but you don't need to only do that to really understand how to be a good sexual partner. In fact, you can learn a lot of that also in a more kind of stable connection with somebody where you really get to explore things. You have a lot of trust, a lot of communication, and sometimes having one partner that you guys have tried everything with and safely explored can teach you just as much.
Even if you're not there yet with having some type of self-pleasure practice, just having an overall healthier relationship with yourself and getting to know yourself and spending time with yourself and learning how to even just be single on your own is going to be so crucial and so helpful for you to be able to show up into a intimate situation with a man.
This is the best piece of advice she could have ended with. There's nothing inherently right or wrong about hookup culture. The important thing to understand is that you will never feel a deep sense of fulfillment from only hooking up. So if you're already building an awesome life for yourself, you like who you're becoming, you're investing in your physical body and your mental health, you're building out your social circle, you're finding some passions or hobbies, and then you want to go around and hook up for fun, fantastic. Because at that point, you've got a grasp of who you are and how you're trying to grow, and then hooking up can be seen through the lens of like, you know what, this will just be fun and I'm not trying to seek something more. But if you've got nothing else going on for yourself and you feel horrible and you think that suddenly you're going to feel loved or beautiful, you will be sorely disappointed. And I'm not saying that everybody needs to get married and settle down, but in my experience over 15 years, most people after hooking up for a while realize that it kind of loses its novelty and eventually want something a bit more substantial.